All right, welcome to another Musicians Tension Reset Lab. My name is Joseph Arnold, and I'm a violinist, Alexander Technique teacher, and Musicians Tension Reset Lab is about musicians learning how to play longer with less tension and pain, and also to play more expressively and with what I call Soulforce. So we'll kind of touch on that maybe a little bit later. And so today's theme is how to stop working at music and start playing music. Sort of a nervous system reset for musicians who have forgotten how to relax. and so, we call it playing music for a reason, and yet so many of us end up finding ourselves working at it. And, that can feel like having too much tension in your body, or getting overly tired or burnt out, or just feeling anxious about your playing, or just not enjoying practicing or performing. And it can feel like there's this, like practicing becomes a chore. It feels like work, something you want to avoid rather than you want to do, you enjoy doing. And there can be this feeling like you're inside your head and trying to figure it out and make it happen. And so this is what I call working at music. And this is not just about music, this is sort of a very universal habit that a lot of people have. And in music, it really gets in the way of what we're trying to do, because music is supposed to feel free. We call it playing music for a reason. And yet, to master something requires work. And so there can be this kind of tension between the work that it takes to master something and the quality of play that we all know deep down is really what music is about. And so a lot of it comes down to the way that you work and how you define work, and even how you define your sense of self in the act of playing music. And we'll get into some of these things today. Let me see, I'm just looking at my notes here. Right. So, another thing is, sometimes if you're really accustomed to working at music, the idea of play, it can sound nice, but you might be worried that you lose your edge if you begin relaxing and playing at it. And the sort of enticing idea from today is that you're going to actually, by implementing some of the things we'll do today, you'll actually regain the sense of play, and that's going to help you get better at what you do. Because if it's all work, then you get tense, and that tension actually interferes with your quality of sound, your technique, etc. And when you regain some of that sense of play, then you're going to feel better, and you're going to enjoy playing more, and your sound's going to improve. And so it's really core to what mastery is about, is play. And so the underlying problem is what I call the doing mode. The doing mode sort of roughly corresponds to the left hemisphere of the brain, which sees things in terms of parts rather than the whole, and in terms of discrete steps, and it's kind of narrowly focused, whereas the right hemisphere, I call it the being mode, sees the context, sees the forest more than the trees, sees the flow of things, experiences the flow of things. And the left hemisphere it exists more in the world of concepts, and the right hemisphere, the being mode, is more about being. And so the one other aspect of the doing mode is that it feels very linear, like you are, again, inside your head and imposing your will on your instrument. And it can feel kind of like mechanical and manipulative. Whereas in the being mode, you're engaged in more like a feedback loop, so it feels more like listening or allowing when playing music. And this improves everything. You get more free, you feel better, your sound is better. So we're going to be exploring this shift today from how to get from the doing mode to the being mode. Now, for those of you watching the recording, I'm a violinist, like I said. I've been playing 35 years now, 36 years, and a professional violinist. And the reason I got into all of this, the Alexander technique and the being mode and all that, is because I used to be so tense that I had injuries in both arms. I could barely play anymore. And this led to a whole journey of self-discovery through the Alexander technique and many other things that showed me that, the way that I was defining excellence, the way I was defining mastery, the way I was defining work, was all really limited, and was actually interfering with the thing that was most important in music and art, which is what I call Soulforce. I wrote a book about this, and so it's been many years now that I've been playing free of tension, and I love teaching this stuff because it's just so much fun watching my students come to life and hearing their sound shift and seeing them, be able to play longer and longer without pain. I love this, and I've taught hundreds of students, and so I'm very happy to be sharing this material in the labs. Okay, let's see if there's any other notes before we begin. That's about it. So, to get into the lesson here, so we're going to be doing a series of explorations together. This will be very experiential, as my lessons always are. So, okay, the first thing is just to notice that there's a connection between what you pay attention to and how your head moves and how your body moves in response to that. Like I was saying before, in the doing mode, there can be this feeling that you're sort of centered, like the center of who you are is in your head somewhere, and like whatever you're sort of imposing your energy, your willpower onto the world around you. And this has a very physical manifestation. It's like, imagine like looking at something across the room or down the road. Typically what people do is they go like this. They kind of squint their eyes and push their head forward. And this is a manifestation of the doing mode. It's like where you put your attention, your head follows that, and then your whole body follows that. And in the doing mode, it's very tense and very narrow, which is why your head kind of, and your eyes scrunch, and your neck gets tight when you do this. So maybe just look at something across the room, or if you're out the window, look at some detail out the window, and just notice what happens in your head and neck, in your eyes, as you try to figure out the details of what you're seeing over there. You'll probably notice that squinting, that head moving forward, that kind of thing. So, and all of that is completely unnecessary. The light bouncing off the object over there is going to reach your retina regardless of how much you squint or shove your head forward. And then all that squinting and shoving of your head impacts the rest of your body, because your body's a web, and the head and neck are like central to the coordinating capacity of your body. Think of like how a cat can land on its feet. If you ever see like really a slowed down video of that, you drop a cat from a height, the first thing that happens is that the head turns to orient to the horizon. And once the head turns, the rest of the body kind of corkscrews around to follow that, and then the cat lands on its feet. And so, again, what we pay attention to, you can imagine hearing something. If you hear something that's outside of your visual field, your attention goes there, your head turns, the rest of your body follows. And so there's this connection then. Attention, head, body. Now the reason this really matters is, one, if you do it poorly, like in the doing mode, then what you're going to notice is a lot of tension in your head and neck when you're doing something. And I see this all the time in my students. Like the other day, I was teaching one of my students how to do a glissando with the third finger on the violin. She was really paying attention to that. And I could see every time she was doing the glissando, she would go like this with her head. Like trying to emphasize it or help it along with her head. And it's totally unnecessary. It just gets in the way. But, somehow there's this habit of this doing mode that we just try to do things with our head, even though really it's just the little finger movement. So let's try something. Imagine that you have a jar with a stuck lid. Go ahead and try to unstick that jar with your hands. Okay, notice what your head's like. Oh, that's really stuck. Like, what are you doing with your head? What do you notice, Tom?
Yeah, I'm gripping my jaw gets tight,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
my
yeah.
teeth are clamping together.
Right, right. And I can see your head like going downward in space, right? And all that's like just wasted energy, wasted effort. Um, and so I'll show you how to undo that in just a minute. But I want to give a couple more. Oh yeah, actually, we'll just do this exploration right now. So uh, the doing mode is associated with a certain kind of. Well, let me see. Just give me a second before I would go into that. Actually, yeah, let's do this. So let's go back to the jar and the stuck lid, and this time think of like receiving the jar in the lid. Think of allowing the lid to unscrew itself. All right, and you can put your hands together and think of that stuck lid and receive the jar in the lid, and notice the difference in your head and neck. So what do you notice, Tom?
So less movement, less tension.
Yeah,
Yeah, I I feel like almost automatic, like the jar's in my right hand and I'm twisting with my left. And at my age, I don't have the grip strength that I used to. So that causes me, I know I'm going to have difficulty. And just
yeah,
that knowledge
yeah.
tenses me up. So,
Right.
so the left hand was more free because I hadn't started untwisting,
Mm,
but the right hand was already tense just because I knew that I was going to have trouble holding the jar tight enough to,
yeah,
to get it loose.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. So all these choices then become apparent as you start to undo things. You realize why you were getting so tight in the first place, and then hopefully you can, with that knowledge, make different choices. Like using a rubber grip pad to grab the jar rather than squeezing more, or recognizing that actually tensing your neck doesn't help make you any stronger. It actually weakens you, just like pulling on the reins of a horse. It slows you down if you're doing that with your head. All right. So exploration number two. So that like you can think of it like receiving your instrument, receiving the difficult thing that you're about to do with your music. So just thinking receiving can make a huge difference. So another exploration that I often teach in terms of the doing mode versus the being mode has to do with a little finger exercise. And so for the doing mode, you can think of your fingers as things to be manipulated. All right, so what we're going to do is just tap your fingers back and forth, just going back and forth, each of your fingertips, and just regard your hands as things to be manipulated. And just notice what that does to you. All right, do you get tighter or freer? And what happens to your attention? What happens to your sense of enjoyment and pleasure? All right, so then stop that, and then regard your hands as beings to be honored. Beings to be honored. And just notice what that does instead. Beings to be honored. Notice what happens to your body, tighter or freer. What happens to your sense of space, bigger or smaller. What happens to your sense of fun and pleasure. What do you notice?
Well, of course, I was less tension, but something interesting else that I noticed is my fingers were closer together,
Hmm.
and it reminded me of fiddle lessons with James Kelly, where he said, "You don't need to use that much bow. You
Hmm.
know, you're working too hard."
Hmm.
Very similar to this. And when you relax and don't use as much bow, which is kind of like the fingers getting closer together, it's easier to do the tapping
Yeah.
without the energy, without the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. Yeah. Now, I noticed there's whenever I do this, that mechanical mindset, thinking of it in terms of things to be manipulated, I get kind of tight and narrow, and I kind of become like a machine in myself. And this is very much what happened to me in college when I had the injuries. I was like a violin practicing machine, and your body's not a machine. So if you have any kind of machine-like thinking, then your body's going to get tight, and maybe you'll injure yourself. All right. So one other thing that I want to talk about is the connection of the doing mode and the being mode in relation to mistakes and performance anxiety. These mistakes and performance anxiety are some of the sort of classic ways that people, or times when people get most tense. And why is this? Why do you think, Tom, that you get most tense, people in general get most tense around mistakes and performance anxiety?
I think it's because we're worried about what other people are going to think of us.
Yeah, that's exactly
Are
right.
they going to like us? Are they going to think we're competent?
Yes, yes. So it basically comes down to a fear of like being exiled, fear of, if I do this, then nobody will love me. And there are lots of ways of addressing that. Some are cognitive, like thinking, well, is it really true that if I play an E flat instead of an E when practicing this, that my family won't love me anymore, or that these audience members, won't love me. And even if it's true that your audience members wouldn't love you anymore, like who cares? You don't depend on them for your survival. So, but oftentimes that sort of cognitive level isn't enough to really relieve the tension that comes from the fear of making mistakes and performance anxiety. And so something like the exploring the being mode can really get at its root cause. Because in the doing mode, when you're thinking of manipulating your instrument in order to get it right, and that's really one of the core thoughts in the doing mode is, I hope I get it right, I hope I don't get it wrong, that kind of thing. And those, getting it right and getting it wrong are two sides of the same coin. So if your practice is focused mostly on getting the notes right, which it is for most people, then of course your nervous system is going to feel unsafe, because at the very same time you're focused on what happens if you get it wrong. Right? The only reason you're focused narrowly on getting it right is because you're worried about the consequences of getting it wrong. And this is antithetical to play. Totally antithetical. When children play, they aren't worried about this. And as soon as you tell them to start doing things one way or another, then they get worried about this. And there's a lie in our culture that the only way to get better is by focusing on right versus wrong. And of course there's sort of different levels of how you think about this, because at the most, like, how am I going to put this? So you need to have sort of developmentally appropriate pedagogy. So if you are working with younger people or beginners, you do talk about this is the right way, this is the wrong way. But people cling to it way too long. And so at later stages of development, if you're older or you're more advanced and you still have this sort of black and white thinking around right and wrong, then you're going to get really tense, and you're going to miss the nuances, and you're going to miss the joy and fun that's possible by reclaiming some of that childlike play. And so, right. So something like the being mode, where you're regarding yourself as a being to be honored while you play, regarding your instrument as a being to be honored, regarding your hands or your voice or whatever, then that changes the whole meaning of what's happening. No longer are you standing on this knife's edge, Oh, am I going to get it right? Am I going to get it wrong? You're more like in a field of play. And then your nervous system calms down because you're telling yourself a different story about what's happening. The story no longer, I have to get it right or else, but the story of, what's here? What's happening? And as soon as you make that shift, then everything changes. And you can explore your music, explore this or that passage, rather than work at it. So just imagine for a moment you have a tricky passage in your music, and it might sound kind of funny to put it this way, but you regard that passage as a being to be honored. Right? So many people treat tricky passages in their music as something awful to get out of the way as quickly as possible. A lot of times, if there's like a really fast run or something, a lot of my students will go through it even faster just to get it over with, which makes everything worse and also dishonors the spirit of the music, so to speak. This music is a being in a certain way, not in the same way that you and I are beings, but it has a life when it's being played, and it has a sort of potential life on the page. And if you regard your music as a thing to be manipulated or a thing to be worked at, then you are missing the whole point. You're missing the spirit of the music. And so what if you were to regard your tricky passages or the performances that you are afraid of as beings to be honored? What if you were to regard your audience members as beings to be honored rather than potential judges? So let's just imagine it for a moment. Why don't you close your eyes and think about something difficult that you're practicing recently. And notice how you think about it typically. When you're practicing it, what's your attitude towards this spot? Are you thinking of it in terms of work? Does it seem like a chore? Is it something you're a little bit afraid of, or that you have to work hard at? What happens to your body when you think about this spot? Do you get tighter or freer? Does your attention get narrower or wider? Is it fun for you to play this spot? And if not, it probably means that you're in the doing mode when playing this spot. Perhaps regarding it as a thing to be manipulated. So what if you were instead to imagine this spot as a being to be honored? It is a being in its own right. Something with its own sort of life and sentience and agency. Or at least a spirit of some kind. Imagine playing this passage as if it were a being to be honored, as if it were a spirit of some kind that you were bringing into being. And that's because that's what we're doing with music. We're taking some creative impulse within us, or interpreting the creative impulse of somebody else and breathing it into life. Playing it into life. And that can only really happen when you honor the life that is in your music. So imagine practicing all your tricky spots that way. open your eyes. What do you make of any of that, Tom?
Well, I'm using the left brain thinking it all makes sense,
Uh-huh.
but I still get nervous and I'm thinking like, I thought I might have to play a tricky passage. I'm working on a new tune out of Matt Kranich's fiddle book,
Okay.
and and I think the problem is when you, especially for older students, maybe younger too, but I don't haven't had any younger students. You're constantly trying to get it right.
Yes.
Can I get this right? Can I get this right? How come I keep getting it wrong? How
Yes.
how can I get it right? And it's you're in the I forget what you said about stages before, but it's like the first stage is you have to encode the correct notes or
Mm-hmm.
techniques
Mm-hmm.
or runs or bowing or whatever, and you just get overwhelmed. You think, I got to get this right. I got to do the bowing correctly. Even though I know that you can do alternative bowings, you can put in two notes instead of a triplet and it'll sound just as good. I know that, but I still feel like the teacher, which is my brain, the teacher's going to get upset when I make a mistake.
Yes. Yes.
And how do you get from that, which is kind of unavoidable at one level when you're just encoding something for that's new.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, if you think about it logically, you think back to something you've been playing for 5 years and you say, you don't think about any of that anymore. And you don't worry about if you play a third higher or a third lower because it still fits in the chord.
Yeah.
How do you get from that,
Yeah.
I'm the student and I got to get it right, to I can play? How do you get the play into the initial stages, I guess is
Yes.
my question.
Yes. Great question. And it has a lot to do with how you, well, just like what you were saying, you've internalized the critical teacher inside you. Your inner critic, and the inner critic gets activated at the beginning stages because there's such a big difference between what you're playing, the quality of what you're playing at the beginning stages, and what you want. And so there's a big gap there, and that can be really triggering for the inner critic. And so there are lots of approaches here, but one idea is to remember who has the actual authority in your musical world. And that's no longer some outside person. Maybe some outside person had the authority when you were younger. That makes sense. You rely on your teachers and parents when you're young to help you survive and make decisions. But when you're older, it's not like there's some music police in the world that's going to come and get you if you play the wrong notes. And of course, we can laugh about that, but this really is sort of like a subconscious idea that so many of us carry around, and it just so gets in the way of your enjoyment and your ability to actually learn well. Because if you're constantly critical of yourself, then you're not learning well. Learning happens best when you're at ease, when you're having fun, when you have curiosity about what's happening, when you're in a state of flow. And so, if you have this sort of inner critical teacher, it means that you're, in a sense, like giving that critic the authority on what's good or not. Letting that critic drive the bus. Whereas, if you're old enough to be able to make your own choices, then you can recognize, hey, I'm in the beginning stages of learning this. It doesn't need to sound perfect. And I can be like easy with myself because I know better. I know better than I did when I was really little. And when I was really little, if the teacher got angry, it was like survival. It's life and death. And it really is for kids. And this is why we get so emotionally triggered around certain things. We have some certain experiences in childhood, and It gets stored in memory as never do that again, right? And so we carry this with us, through adulthood, unless we do, therapy or whatever, to unpack it, or we just, get older and have more experiences in life and realize, oh yeah, that stuff isn't as important as I thought. And so you can recognize, I guess the point of this approach is to recognize that you are in charge of your musical life. You are the ultimate authority. You are your ultimate audience member. Even if you are playing for audiences as a professional, ultimately you're doing this for yourself. And yes, it's nice to please your audience members. But if you please your audience members, why are you doing that? It's because you're trying to please yourself. Because it's pleasing to you to please your audience members. And it's pleasing to you to play beautifully. Another aspect of this is to think about ends and means. Some people say that the means justify the ends. But what if there are no ends? What if the ends never come? Then all we have are means. What you have in the end is the product of your means. And if you are, playing with all this tension, playing without enjoyment, then that's what you get. And so your learning process then requires, or at least to enjoy the beginning stages of the learning process, requires reclaiming your own authority, establishing more appropriate guidelines for success, like coming back to baby steps. Oh yeah, look, I did this or that right momentarily. Or and also like having the kinds of effortlessness techniques that I share here really makes a big difference, because in those when your inner critic is getting so triggered, you're going to want to tense in and grab and control and force. And so having an awareness of like, oh no, that's not going to help, is actually going to help you make better, quicker progress. Because the more relaxed you can be while learning something, the more you're going to ingrain being relaxed while you're doing it, and the more relaxed you are, the better your technique gets. So another perspective on what this can require is when you make a mistake, just pause. Receive the mistake. Let the mistake be a being to be honored. So you don't react to it right away, right, with all that tension. And then you can make more appropriate choices based on your adult awareness. So I was talking for a while there. How does any of that land with you, Tom?
It all makes sense. It's just putting it all together. Like I thought I might have to play something today, so I'm looking at the first line of this tune I'm working on. And before I even pick up my instrument, I'm getting tense. So I remember your work lab where you said, just pause
Yeah,
and think about the fact that you're going to, well, what the word you just used, receive your instrument,
yeah, yeah,
and feel comfortable.
yeah,
And then maybe take a deep breath
yes,
and then say, like you just said, it makes sense to say, I'm in charge. If I don't get it right, I just need to keep, bad word, working on. I need to keep playing with
yeah,
it
yeah,
until it feels comfortable. That's the problem. It seems so much like the idea that you have to encode with repetitions. That sounds like work, and
yes,
at one level, that's necessary.
yes,
But how do you take that from work, playing it 10 times correctly, to playing it
yes,
10 times correctly instead of working at it 10 times
yes,
correctly?
yes, yes. I would say it's more like looking at it from 10 different angles. Because doing something 10 times in a row correctly builds a really fragile kind of mastery, because you only know how to do it one way. Whereas if you do it from 10 different angles, then you get 10 different perspectives on the same thing, and you know it inside out. And you know it in a, you could say, anti-fragile kind of way, which is a much deeper kind of learning. And there's no formula for it. I think this is really the thing. Our culture is obsessed with the one right thing that's going to fix everything forever. Look at all of our advertisements. The whole idea of war is basically this: get rid of that one thing, that one person or country, and everything's going to be fixed forever. It doesn't work that way. That is so simplistic. Whereas, if you take a look at something from many different angles, it gets into your body, and yet there isn't like a formula for doing that, other than to say just explore, or just look at it try it in lots of different ways. Get to know it, embody it, immerse yourself in it, play around with it. There isn't like a guarantee that you're going to get it right, but you're going to know it at such a deep level, and really that's where the freedom comes from of mastery, is knowing something at an embodied level so deeply that you can let go while you play it. So this is what I would recommend. Maybe we can try it right now. Is on the one level is having practice techniques, the right set of practice techniques that let you explore something in lots of different ways, rather than relying on just do it 10 times in a row correctly. That's only one practice technique, and not a very good one. And then the other thing is having a bunch of these effortlessness skills. So we've been talking for a long time. Let's make this practical. You willing to
Sure.
play something you're not very good at?
Well, I've been working at it, but it's the first. I'll just play. I also believe in chunks, that you shouldn't work on the whole thing and keep making mistake after mistake,
Yeah.
that you should play with one thing. So
Yeah.
I'll do the first two measures of this tune,
Okay, sounds good.
and then on and on.
Okay. So what do you notice about yourself while you play that?
I was playing too fast because I'm nervous. That's one thing. Faster than I can do it comfortably.
Okay.
Secondly, there's a triplet, and I worry about, because my little finger isn't good enough to. It's the third finger. I'm playing a G on the D string, and it's
Yeah.
and I think I'm always going to get it wrong. I'm being my inner critic again,
Yeah.
because I don't trust my little finger.
Right. Okay, great. So let's actually start with that triplet then. So we'll just use some of the little methods I brought up today. So one is just receiving that little da 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 da. Just play it a couple times and think of, instead of doing it, thinking of receiving it. What do you notice?
It felt better, and it sounded better.
Sure did.
More importantly,
Yeah.
yeah. And I wasn't thinking about the little finger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't anticipating. Oh, here comes the problem.
Yeah.
Your little finger doesn't often get this just exactly what you want, and then of course it doesn't, because you're thinking that.
Yes, exactly. Right. This is the lie of trying hard. The lie is that it's going to be more effective. Like more effort equals more effective. That is such a lie. Because if you over focus on something, then your body gets tight. And if your body's tight, that's interfering with your ability to do the thing that you're trying to do. Whereas if you're receiving it, then you're trusting. This is the leap of faith. You have to trust that your body knows how to do it. And you trust that it'll somehow happen.
Right.
That you're like overbearing control.
Well, I've also read about certain people say that muscle memory is a misnomer, because it's really your brain telling your body. And so I'm thinking, if my brain is thinking about screwing it up or the little finger, instead of hearing the music and letting it come out, receiving it, to use your word, that's a problem. Is my brain is interfering with my body's
Exactly.
ability to do this. My body has done it. I've probably played that phrase now in the last week or two, hundreds of times, maybe 500 times. So my body knows how to do it.
Yes. Yes.
I've done it right often enough, but then I get nervous. Well, I'm going to screw it up. I'm going to screw it because I don't trust my little finger.
Yes. Yes.
And so, okay, so how do I,
Yeah.
how do you stop doing that?
Okay. So what? Well, this is one process you can follow. Is to go to all of your tricky spots, just like this, the spots where you get tighter than you'd like. I call them critical moments, and you just take each of those little spots and you receive each of those. You make sure that you can do each of them like correctly enough in this sort of receiving mode. All right, and then you could do what I call section buildup, which is to play like instead of just 3 or 4 notes, you play a whole measure, or you can even just add one note on either side, one note before, one note after, one note before, one note after, etc., until you have a whole phrase. So this is a very effective practice technique, and as long as you continue receiving what you're playing. So let's try a little bit of that. So why don't you go just like a note or two before. Da 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 dum. All right, and were you still receiving those notes?
No, I was tense again.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So make sure you receive them.
It felt better, but it didn't sound better.
Yeah. So just try again. That felt more like doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Receive. More like it. Take your time with it though. Receiving, listening. Well, that was better.
Yeah, it was better because I added it's a down bow to start. I added the note that I was leaving out and it felt smoother.
Okay. Oh, that was even better.
Yeah.
Um, what was I going to say? It's okay. It'll come back to me. So why don't you try playing those full 2 measures and really, oh yeah, it's a feedback loop, right? Because that's what I was going to say. When you're in this doing mode, like it's very linear. Like I'm in here, I'm imposing my will onto the violin. Whereas with receiving, you're tapping into a feedback loop that's happening. Yes, there's doing that's happening, but you're also receiving the sensory input of what's happening. And that's where the learning happens. That's where the steering the ship happens through that receiving. You need to have accurate sensory information to be able to change what you're doing well. So why don't you try that whole page then, or rather the whole couple measures.
Measures.
Receiving. Okay, what do you notice?
Yeah. I noticed it was better because I only had one thing on my mind, which makes it sound like work. But I mean, in other words, instead of thinking about the mistakes I was going to make or how hard this bowing was or this triplet, I was listening more. It was like when you said receiving, it was like listening to myself.
Yes.
I know I can play it. It's just that I get so nervous that I don't play it the way I want.
Yeah.
So that helped to just to not focus on the details. I've been focusing on the details for a week and a half now.
Yeah. And
On these two.
there's absolutely an appropriate place for focusing on the details. There is. It just shouldn't be the primary driver of your learning process. It should be maybe 10 to 20% of what you do.
I think, not to get off on a tangent, but it relates to stuff you said before. I think it goes back to parents, and I played a lot of sports as a kid, and I remember football coaches yelling at you, do it right, do it the way I showed you.
Yeah.
Don't do it that way. Do it
Yes.
again. And
Yes.
do it right this time. I can hear those voices
Yes. Yes.
in my head, and I think that's hard to get rid of.
Yes. Yeah, it gets in there very deeply. And you can undo it in this present moment. Anytime that you think of receiving and you see that it actually helps you play better, right? Because it helped your sound this last time. You let go of all that, and it didn't fall apart. In fact, it got better. You sounded better. It flowed better. It was better in tune. Sound quality is better. Um, Everything about your playing got better, right? When you let go of trying to get it right so hard, right? So when you see that, that makes a real shift in your nervous system, real shift in your brain. Like, oh, maybe I don't have to do that anymore. And if you have enough moments of that kind of insight, then that whole old habit just falls apart by itself.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, I think that's enough for today. Do you have any final questions, comments, takeaways?
No, I just want to keep working. I got to keep language or the way you think.
Yeah.
I got to get off this thing with Joseph and start working harder on not working so hard.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
hard to get out of that mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be excited to explore that some more. Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you so much, Tom, for joining. And I'll be here same time next week, next Saturday. So I hope you can make that. And is there anything else I want to announce? Oh yeah, I might be doing some themes, like having like a whole series of labs along a certain kind of theme, a certain kind of curriculum. So I'll be sharing more about that soon. And yeah, for anybody watching this later on, I have various programs. I have my book, Soulforce, How to Discover Your Artistic Purpose, Create More Freely, and Make Art That Matters. It won 3 awards. And I have a one-on-one program. I might consider starting a group program soon. Again, all on these same themes. And really the purpose of these the lessons that you could take from me, the private lessons, etc., is really to make a permanent change in your brain and nervous system. So, as we saw today, these habits run deep, and you can have a nice experience, even in coming to a lab like this. But if you want to make that change permanent, if you want to get that like deeply into your body, how to be more at ease, how to embody that being mode, then that's really what the lessons are for, over a series of 8 weeks or so, or longer if you choose. Some of my students have been taking lessons with me for 10 years. Depends on how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go. Right. So yeah, but basically in 8 weeks you can make a very sizable shift in your habits and patterns. And anyway, so you can learn more about that, get testimonials, see testimonials and all that at soulforcearts.com/pwp, Perform Without Pain.
I
Go ahead.
One last thing.
Yeah.
You usually raffle off a book, but I have your book already.
Yeah.
So take one of your books and give it to a student that you think maybe couldn't otherwise afford it.
Perhaps I'll do that. All right. Good. Well, thanks for coming, Tom, and I hope to see you all next time.
Bye.